You're listening to The Big Lift, the podcast of WebTrends Optimize, the CRO solution that enables marketers and developers to maximize the ROI on their digital properties. WebTrends Optimize is a powerful, feature-rich and easy-to-use solution, all delivered within a fixed-price contract with no additional cost for increased functionality ever. During these podcasts, we meet some of the key influencers within the marketing and conversion world to understand their roles and examine their challenges. Today, I'm joined by Andrew Furlong, Managing Director of REO Digital, to see if we can define the true value of conversion rate optimization. REO Digital is a customer experience agency with an impressive client list, and Andrew has spent over 10 years demonstrating that the value of CRO can be defined, but can it be clearly measured? So Andrew, tell me a little about REO Digital and how does it differ from Redeye, because I'm a little confused.
Yeah, sure. So REO Digital is a conversion rate optimization agency, and we focus on helping businesses improve their customer experience, and we do that through providing user research to explore insights into why customer bases are behaving in certain ways, and then we'll use that alongside analytical data to come up with ideas and hypotheses around how we could improve the website essentially for our end customers. And so from there, we would put in place a program of optimization, which is, A/B testing, experimentation. Mm-hmm. There's lots of words that are sort of being thrown around these days.
Absolutely.
But ultimately, that's sort of, I suppose, a core part of the deliverable. And that program of optimization will run for, a period based on a particular business objective we're aiming to improve. So that could be, we could be looking at it quarterly. It could be something a little bit more short term, or alternatively, we're working on a sort of big business impact change over a program that might be over 12 months or longer. So alongside sort of that program optimization, we do support brands with design work as well, because ultimately, with optimization and testing, there is only so far you can go. So when we're looking at redesigning or reviewing a whole journey, it might be more beneficial to actually redesign that journey and then look to optimize it. So what we typically find is with a brand, we might start with optimization and then sort of expand our services into, broader, deeper customer research and then also design work. In terms of where that fits with Redeye, so Redeye used to own REO Digital essentially. And REO Digital was based in London and was operating much in the same way as I just described, mm-hmm. but as a component part of Redeye. Now, Redeye is a marketing automation business, so they provide the sort of CRM marcoms function. So the idea behind the two businesses was Redeye, through its own technology, could drive customers through the CRM marketing automation practices. And then by having a specialist agency that was focusing on essentially converting that traffic, that would provide end customers with a sort of end-to-end solution, which is, will help you maximize your customer base, whether that's increasing lifetime value, whether that's increasing conversions, by providing a technology solution to drive the traffic and then having experts who could make the most of that traffic, essentially. It didn't really pan out the way we wanted, just because actually you were very different models. You had one which was a technology business, the other an agency. Culturally, there wasn't the fit maybe that we wanted. Mm-hmm. And so I'd been at Redeye for some time. And so it was spun out and became a separate business, and that's where we are today.
So in essence, you're completely separate. You don't get all your business through Redeye. You're independent. You can go off and get your own clients, etc.
Yeah, so absolutely. So completely separate. So just over 2.5 years ago now, it was set up as a separate business, and now it's completely separate. So it was part of a group structure within the Redeye. So it was a subsidiary of Redeye, and now it's a completely separate company. So no affiliation whatsoever, other than the sort of history, I guess, of Redeye. Still on great terms with them. Obviously worked with the people there for quite some time. So we do share some clients, and if we needed to recommend a marketing automation tool, we would obviously recommend them. And we'd hope they would obviously recommend us if they needed any of their customers needed optimization. So
let's hope so. Yes.
There's great. Obviously you work with people for. I've been there for 8-9 years. So if you work in an organization for that long, you do obviously build some friendships, but there's also, clearly we're doing something right because we're growing quite well. So it's just been easier, I guess, having now taken it out as a separate business, to focus on the core of what we were, rather than, if you talk about it from a marketing exercise, if we went to an event, how do we balance off marketing automation versus conversion? Where do the leads go? How do we prioritize it? So all of those sorts of things came into it, whereas now it's much easier.
Now, you've used a couple of terms already in this conversation with regard to A/B testing, CRO, optimization. I think to make it clear for everybody, we'll use one term if we can for the rest of this discussion, which is CRO, conversion rate optimization, which accumulates a whole lot of testing and personalization and different aspects of being able to modify UX, et cetera, et cetera. But how would you define CRO? More importantly, how would you define the value of CRO?
I think at its absolute core, CRO, and I sort of remember back maybe 10 years ago when it really started to come about as a discipline, was, and I still think this is true today, fundamentally the value lies in influencing the conversion rates of a website, which ultimately means you're going to get more from your acquisition spend, but also then, it's also about the lifetime value of a customer. So I think, conversion rate optimization in its purest sense is about maximizing acquisition spend, driving a greater return from that, and then also focusing on your loyal customer segments and driving greater lifetime value out of them by providing them with an experience that's slightly different to your new customers. Yeah, fundamentally that's what it is, in terms of the sort of, from my perspective anyway. The value then is sort of the softer values, which is where I think most of the focus is actually about then getting to understand your customers, pushing your website to a point where actually then you have the business case to go into a redesign or to re-platform or to highlight, sort of more, not cynical, but the tactics that are then used to show that, look, our website isn't working if we had this technology, or if we re-platform, or if we re-architectured, or if we redesigned it, this is what we could be doing. And all of those elements come into it as well. But yeah, it's core maximizing acquisition spend, and driving lifetime value for customers.
With that kind of mantra, maximizing acquisition spend, which I think is a very solid way of being able to pin CRO to a deliverable, is it possible to measure it?
It's a great question. I mean, it is. I think, it certainly is possible, but it's not easy. And I think that's been a real drawback for CRO as a whole, sort of having been in the industry now for the best part of 10 years. I don't think it's quite lived up to its potential. And I think some of that stems from the fact that it isn't a simple exercise. So if you talk, we're an agency, so we would obviously back ourselves in terms of the value, both monetary, but also the expertise and lots of other softer things that we can bring to the table. But fundamentally, we would back ourselves to drive a return on investment for our customers. So we've got an invested interest in making sure that we can quantify that. So it's not as easy as you might think. The way that people could typically go about it is essentially you would run, so once you come up with your conversion rate optimization strategy, and that culminates in a test where you've got variant A versus variant B, you would effectively run that test, and then from there you're able to extract the uplift in revenue from that test. That again sounds fairly simple, but in essence it isn't, because depending on what you're testing, you need to first of all understand the influence that would have had on the conversion, and then understand what the average revenue is from the sessions that you'd be running. You then need to extract the cost of running that test. You then need to sort of annualize that and look at also ways of excluding seasonality, other marketing activities that may be happening. Ultimately we're working off statistical models. So there are going to be anomalies. So there has to be a high level of statistical significance. That said, there's always a degree of randomization. If you're doing enough testing, there's going to be outliers that come in there. So just talking this through with you already, you can see it's not a simple, nice equation that you can put into a set of management accounts and run through. So to answer your question directly, yes, it is possible to quantify it, but it's not a simple thing to do. And it's something that I don't think the industry has really figured out.
Because I think where I'm coming from is when you talk about acquisition spend, and let's just say PPC for that matter, it's very measurable.
Yeah.
You spend X, you get X times whatever it might be over a period of time. And that to the board or the senior management of the company is a kind of a nice thing to say, yeah, I spend that, I get that, I can see the results. Yes, it's working well. Yet the calculation of being able to deliver return on investment on CRO, as you've kind of described, is a little woolly, to say the least. How is it that you can define what the value of CRO is to those customers who are thinking about implementing a CRO program?
I mean, I would certainly just start with taking the results that you've got from a particular test. So there's an element of guesstimation in it, to be quite frank, and even potentially with some of the acquisition spend that's put through, the attribution model that's needed to understand, your PPC versus your email or versus other kind of spends that come into it. So from a testing perspective, simply what you would do is look at the uplift that you've generated. So if we put it into numbers, just to keep it simple, if you've got 1,000 visitors coming through, and you're able to generate through your variant B versus your control that I sort of illustrated earlier on, an uplift of 2%, well, then you can look at the difference of what that would be if your average order value is £10, and you can extract that. And let's say, for argument's sake, that test ran for 35 days, you can start to work out what the uplift would be over, say, 12 months. So, you work out the daily increase based on that 2% increase. And then from there, you can model that. So that's the simplest way of doing it and showing the value for it. Unfortunately, it isn't really done in that way. I think for the most part, what tends to be the measure of success or value is just an increase in testing. So there's a sort of blind acceptance these days that we need to be testing and improving and iterating on a website. So the value actually comes from increasing the number of tests you're running, essentially.
But if those tests aren't showing an increase in profit, put it in one way, or sales or profit, then surely it's challenging to be able to get the ears of the board to be able to want to do more testing.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and I think that's a problem. My background is a commercial one, so it's just part of who I am. And as much as I love the subject matter and get really excited about conversion rate optimization and uplift and testing and user research, so it's really exciting and interesting to watch. Fundamentally, I still come back to sort of who I am, which is, okay, well, what does that mean for the business? How are they improving it? And how that ripples up to a board for somebody to take a strategic initiative to drive and invest in conversion rate optimization. It is a problem, and I think it stems from the fact that the industry is, rightly or wrongly, has a lot of practitioners in it. And so the academic element of testing and learning and understanding your customers, all of that supersedes the underlying commercial value. And there are very few businesses that have really sat down and understood, what is it we're trying to achieve? Great, we're going to do more tests. We're going to run a program of conversion rate optimization. That means we're now going to be delivering 100 tests instead of 20. What's the point in that? What is it they're trying to achieve? There's terms like culture experimentation banded around. There's, digital transformation, lots of organization changes that are happening. From what I can observe in the industry, very few are thinking about what the purpose is of that. We're sort of doing it, and it is a universal we, for the sake of it. I think from just experience and looking across industries, gaming is probably an industry that's the most mature in terms of really understanding the value of a test. So what is a winning test to us? What does it cost us? How does that impact? And I think partly that just comes down to the fact that, and I don't mean to oversimplify the sort of the sector, but they have a fairly linear journey. For the most part, it's about potentially playing for free, then converting that into a paid customer, and then essentially putting a bet down or whatever it may be, as a slot or a roulette. And that journey is fairly straightforward and linear compared to a retailer or another business where there are lots of entry points. There's often huge volumes of products, so it's much harder to understand how an influence on changing something on a PDP is going to massively impact conversion rates, and modeling that up. Then you factor in things like returns. Like I said earlier on, obviously we're maximizing acquisition spend, but if we're acquiring the wrong type of customers, that's not good business either. So, if you're the FD of an organization, you need that full picture. You're not just going to look at the high value of a return from a particular test. And again, I think all of these complexities come into why commercial people aren't engaged, and it is a problem.
So is there a way of being able to get the people inside an organisation, even right up to the board, to think differently about the value of CRO? And if so, who within that organisation should be responsible for the profitability of CRO?
I think you have to involve finance. And again, it differs slightly, from industry to industry in terms of the sort of job roles that people hold. But e-commerce directors, digital directors should be ultimately the people that are held accountable. Often they will have a personal target that's linked to the performance or the commercial performance, revenue performance of the digital estate, so not just the website. So ultimately, they should be held accountable. And then finance needs to be heavily involved in order to come up with a robust means of quantifying the revenue generated from an uplift of from a program of conversion rate optimization.
But do you think it's the responsibility of companies like yours and ours to be able to put together a kind of a framework for that?
Yeah, I do, absolutely. And it's, certainly from our perspective, it's something we try and do and push forward with all of our clients that we work with. And there's tons of little calculators out there. If you go and do a Google, you can sort of, there's plenty of tools. But it is really one of those things that is going to be custom to every single business. Your average orders value are going to be different. If you just take the example of a retailer, the level of returns are going to be different. The emphasis could be on customer loyalty. If you're a travel business, your core product, if you're selling flights, that's how you're attracting customers, but you're not necessarily generating your revenue from that. It's all the ancillary products that come into it. So then you need to start working with the CRM teams, with the marketing teams, the finance, and so on and so forth. So yes, I would argue it's definitely up to us to come up with a model for it. And we try incredibly hard because, like I said at the top of the call, we've got an invested interest. We want to hold ourselves accountable. If we're looking to renew a contract, being able to put in front of that particular customer, okay, you've spent X amount with us and we've delivered a return of 20 to 1. That's great for us. It makes it really hard to sort of argue that why wouldn't they want to continue? It's just getting to that model in an easy, robust way. So, and again, if you look at sort of revenue share models, so if there's a baseline cost to cover some of the resource in order to run a program of conversion rate optimization, there aren't many commercial models that then work on a revenue share, which you often see in other sectors, where it is about, okay, we've worked out that the average order value is, say, £10. If we can deliver another 100 orders, then we want 10% of that incremental revenue. Really simple, easy to quantify, shared risk between the potential supplier and the customer. Why wouldn't a business invest in a model like that?
And why don't they?
Because there's no agreement on what the uplift is. So a business would turn around and say, okay, great, test one, if for argument's sake, let's say we work with ABC Limited tomorrow and we start and run a test for 35 days, great success, we can show an uplift of 5%. Well, that hasn't yet carried through to their bottom line. They're not seeing that. They're not seeing that annualized. So what we're telling them is, in the control, we had 1,000 visitors. That performed better. If you then hard code that and run it to 100% of your traffic, you should see a significant uplift. That's not the same as already having sort of had those transactions come through, which is what they typically would have, say, with a piece of technology that might sit on top and drive that incremental change. They being the client, need to hard code the winning variant, which, depending on how the test was set up, whether it was done server side or client side, could take some time. There's other constraints and resources that come into it with developers, and so the business, it could be 6 months before they see the real return on that winning test. And I think this is certainly part of the issue around what is the value and actually understanding it. So there then need to be a huge amount of work up front for the potential, for the customer and the supplier to work out exactly how revenue uplift is going to be accounted for. And you would have to involve finance. The bottom line is the cost of the supplier. It's the individual's client side who would be involved in supporting the program. It's, if you're a retailer, it's accounting for returns, all of those sorts of things.
I mean, but many of those are still applicable to PPC costs, surely.
Yes, absolutely. But I think, again, without wanting to sort of sound harsh in that industry, it's a bit cruder in that it's just simply about getting numbers through. And so the clicking through and the driving through is based on an accepted model. So they have fixed numbers of conversions coming through. If I've got 100 people coming into my funnel and I can get 200 people coming into my funnel, then ultimately I'm going to make more money. And that's something that's sort of widely accepted and understood, which comes back to the core of conversion rate optimization. Actually, it would probably cost you less to keep your 100, but actually convert a higher number of those 100 than it would to double the volume coming through at the top of the funnel. But there's a risk with the unknown and the lack of being able to quantify that. It's, you see similar things in email. Email's very quantifiable and accountable, and the return on investment's good. So businesses have confidence in that model, which is, if we effectively increase the volume, we're going to increase the revenue and the bottom line. And we have sound models for calculating that. And it's the same in PPC. And we don't have a sound model in conversion rate optimization because there's lots of different ways of doing it. There isn't a sort of standardized way of calculating it. There isn't a curriculum out there. There isn't a sort of foundation, if you like, that is, or an industry norm for calculating the uplift from a program of conversion rate optimization.
So it's interesting you say that because one of the points I wanted to cover when you talked about there's lots of practitioners, etc. If you look at the Chartered Institute of Marketers, and I think CRO sits as much in marketing as it does in analysis of a business, there doesn't seem to be any courses specifically designed around CRO. And therefore, there doesn't seem to be what I would describe as the gathering together of defining how you can gain profitability and return on investment out of CRO, and the challenge of being able to, each practitioner's trying to come up with their own calculations of making that work, seems to muddy the waters a little bit. Do you think now's the time to be thinking that actually marketers ought to be trained in CRO as part of their practice?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's interesting because CRO does fall into marketing, but in some ways it's also part of e-commerce and digital. And to be fair to a CRO practitioner, the depth and breadth of expertise is really quite, it's really varied. To be really good at it, you need to be analytical, you need to be creative, you need to have at least some understanding of sort of how a website works, technically speaking, to recognize whether a test is feasible or not. And then ultimately, you also need to think like a marketeer. And I think this is the big bit is, compared to maybe sort of user experience or, an analyst that are focused very much on a certain part, marketeers are looking at the slightly bigger picture, which is the end-to-end journey. How are we driving customers to our service offering, product, website, app, whatever it may be, and then how are we interacting with them and how are we trying to convert them and retain them and increase loyalty. So that sort of bigger picture is also what a conversion rate optimization practitioner is thinking about. So it is it's a complex role and it's a complex sector, and I think that's probably part of the issue is to be really good. You need all of those areas. You have to have an understanding of user experience, and I don't mean that in terms of just you put the letters U and X next to your word. You genuinely need to have an understanding of user experience, the sort of practicalities of it, what users go through, what they look for, what makes a good UX, and have that as a baseline to work from. Then you need to understand the business objectives and what they're working through. And the compromises then come about. So yes, this would be the perfect solution for the customer or the user, but that isn't quite what the business is trying to achieve. So how do we reach a compromise there and provide a sort of hybrid experience, and that then formulates into a potential test idea? But ultimately, is that going to impact the lifetime value of customers? And that's where you're starting to think like a marketeer, as well as a creativity. It's easy to come by. You can come up with ideas, translating those into a test and designing it and thinking about the best ways of implementing it. You need to be creative. and that's not about just changing a color on a button or something. So I think it's quite a broad. It's a bit like and it's a discipline as opposed to a
Yeah.
trade, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. And so it pulls in from so many different areas that there is an element of trying to ring fence that as a course would be quite tricky, because you would only really be touching into each one of those areas at quite a high level, and so you'd need to then spend time and specialize, which really now we're only seeing people with 6, 7, 8 years experience, and there's not that many, and yet there's loads of people recruiting in the UK for CRO roles. So there's a lot of junior people coming through, but they still need 2, 3, 4, 5 years experience before they become not necessarily experts, but they have the experience in each one of these areas to really execute and conceptually understand what they're trying to do. And I think it's until you get to that point, you're still learning so much yourself as a practitioner. You probably haven't even thought about the commercial impact of what you're trying to do.
But it's surely a bit like the chicken and egg, because I mean, some recent research I did, there was over 600 job vacancies for people with conversion rate optimization skills in the UK alone, and that's okay. There's lots of marketers' roles out there, but this seems to be an area where more and more businesses are investing, at least maybe notionally, to see if it works, to be competitive against their competitors, etc. But it's this kind of, as you mentioned just now, this qualified versus those people who are entering into it. And I'm not sure that there are enough qualified people. But unless the qualified people become the teachers of the people who become raw recruits, I think we're always going to be in this area where it's still seen as a little bit, well, black art isn't the right word, but it's a very specialist subject. And it's a bit like SEO, I suppose. SEO is a very specialist subject, and there is a broad element of knowledge that's needed for that. But SEO is taught at the Chartered Institute of Marketing, CRO less so. I'm just trying to think, is we need to be able to elevate and formulate and even format the process of what a CRO specialist is, so that more and more people can say, yes, I do need one of those, and these are the skills I need them to have, as a very basic minimum. I'm not sure we're even at that rate now, looking at some of the roles and the job descriptions of people that they put out there. It's just very woolly. We want you to increase the user experience. Well, that's great, but you need to help them know how to do that. Would you say that's a fair assessment?
Yeah, I would. I mean, we interview people continuously, and I haven't obviously met all 500 potential people, but yeah, over the last 4 or 5 years, yeah, I've interviewed a lot of people as potential conversion rate optimization consultants, and I must say we're very lucky with the people that obviously work for us. They're incredibly skilled, and do have a lot of experience, so we are able to support and educate everybody we work with, and that's a key component of it. We're not under any illusions. There's an organisation would want to bring in that sort of IP, if you like, and so we do work and train and educate and enable teams. That's absolutely a massive part of it. So it's being done through agencies, and also as certain brands sort of improve and grow, we're seeing that happen. But it's not being done in a structured way. Absolutely not. Which is unfortunate, because I'd say there are often big areas that are missing, and that typically is the sort of discovery phase. So understanding user research, being able to look into qualitative data, and then align that with analytical and quantitative data. They're big areas that are often lacking. And so what tends to come about is then the emphasis is just on output. So, okay, we'll just do as many tests as we can. And we're seeing that as across the industry, which is, it's about velocity of testing.
Yep.
Now that definitely has its place. I'm not saying it doesn't, but it's all great throwing mud at the wall. But if none of it sticks, or very little of it sticks, is that really the right way to go? And again, coming back to what we were talking about earlier on, there is a failing in the industry that we haven't made it easier to quantify the value, and therefore the investment that should be made in conversion rate optimization. And so businesses are moving away from that as an indicator of success. And it seems to be these days it's about velocity. of testing essentially is what is measured. So people are recruiting people. This is my understanding of it anyway, certainly, to put them in that dedicated role so that they've got someone who is responsible for testing output.
Mm-hmm.
So conversion rate optimization is sort of turning into testing, and the measurement of success is the number of tests we can run, not the win rate, success rate, and therefore revenue uplift of those. And that then is causing disruption in the market, I'd say.
So just as kind of more as a final comment, acquisition cost has always led in the expenditure of a marketer's budget. I mean, that's been the case for the last 10, 15, maybe even 20 years. And CRO is obviously lagged behind in that because it's relatively new. I won't say it's completely new. Do you think it's time for organizations to try and redress the balance and employ more people who absolutely understand the value of CRO? I'm seeing it that more and more companies are having a CRO tool in their technology stack, but I'm not sure whether that tool is being utilized, but other than the change of a button color or something like that. So I'm not sure whether companies should be spending a higher proportion of the acquisition cost. And I think with the third-party cookie demise, whenever that actually happens, converting those clicks that they get from their Google ads surely becomes much more important, therefore much more revenue-centric.
Yeah, I mean, the numbers that we generate in terms of uplift, if I look over the last sort of 7-8 years in terms of the, even when it was more in its infancy, even through to now, it really works. Conversion rate optimization works. It's the numbers are staggering, and I think the other bit that's great from taking it seriously and putting the right processes in place and spending the time to understand the value that you're going to get from either using an external agency to give you the support you need or investing in house, is that it's the foundation then for more change. So it definitely works, but every business has to take the time to work out what the value is from a program, and that isn't just as simple as, oh well, we know the average order value increase. We increased revenue in variant 1 by 2%. Therefore, yeah, great, we're happy. We'll just extract that, annualize that, and that gives us our number. Because that's just not, it's just incorrect. You haven't probably taken account of losing tests. So, as a very crude measure, you should use this. Great, everybody wants to shout about the winning tests, but they don't always win. So you have to consider the losing test as well.
And even the losing tests gives you some value.
Yeah, it does, of course. But if if we're talking at it purely from a revenue perspective, in terms of, of course, it gives you missed opportunities and other things as well. So, you have to look at all of the tests and all of the program, and then look at what that means to you, not just from a revenue figure, but on the bottom line as well. If a business can do that and take the time to do it, they will be one of few, because not many really report on it and understand it accurately. So I would argue that it's one of the most important things you could do, which is, if we improve the customer experience for our potential customers and existing customers, what is the revenue and profit impact on that? And conversion rate optimization is the best tactic to kind of run and sort of govern that, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think that my take on it is conversion rate optimization. It's not mature by any means yet, but it is maturing. And we're in a space now where people are contemplating utilizing CRO as a tool in their toolbox, where maybe 5 years ago it was kind of a out on a limb kind of conversation to have CRO. It now seems to be much more prevalent, as I said a little earlier, but I still think there's a long way for companies to go to be able to maximize the potential of CRO and the revenue generation capabilities of CRO. And ultimately, that is to maximize the acquisition costs or the acquisition spends that they've got. So, Andrew, I think it's been an interesting conversation thus far. I think it's one of those things that I'd like to come back to you maybe even a year's time to see if the maturity has really happened the way we hope it will do over the next 12 months. But for now, I think it's been a great conversation, and thank you very much for your time.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, John.